from their bikes and they fled the scene, they have a moment. They have a brotherly moment where they reanalyze the situation, talk about what happened, why it happened. And between Cleo and Frankie, they were having somewhat of a verbal debate going on and pertains to what happened and why it happened. And neither one of them were wrong. What's going on, everybody? This is Chris Freeman back with another book review video over my novel series, the SharpenYours Book series, right? Now, real quick, I want to address something that I left out on the last video when we were talking about part one. And that's the illustrations, and for those who have a copy for themselves, I'm pretty sure you noticed that the illustrations are in black and white. And there's an explanation for that. Now, when I was self-publishing part one, I overlooked the option to choose between color and black and white. And because I overlooked that when I was formatting everything, by default, it chose black and white. Honest mistake, man. I tried to go back and redo it, but it's one of those things where you gotta unpublish and then republish all over again. And honestly, I got so caught up in part two that I just never went back and corrected it. So yeah, sorry about that. But with that being said, we're going to move on to part two. Okay, man, now that we got that stuff out the way, let's move on to part two, shall we? Which is Trouble on Thursday. Okay, man. Now, before we get into the synopsis and what the story is about and all that other jazz, I want to talk about a couple of different things, man, before we move forward. For starters, it's a lot longer than part one. We go from 32 pages in part one to 103 in part two. And I say that to say I put a lot into this book, regardless of how bland the cover may be. Well, I'll put it to you like this. When I was writing this story, part two, I really used that as an opportunity for me to exercise different areas of writing or different levels of writing even, especially within the drama realm. There's some action in here as well, a little bit of love interest. It's a mutt, man. There's a lot that's in this story, and there's a lot that a viewer, or not a viewer, but a reader can learn from even. I also did the illustrations for this book as I did for the rest of the book series moving forward. And it's no disrespect to the person that I partnered up with for part one. But I will say this, man, having done my own illustrations, it does give me a strong sense of appreciation. And I'm no artist by any means, man. Now, granted, even though I'm not an artist, or I don't consider myself an artist, these pictures are not bad by any means either. I'm impressed with them, and I'm not being biased about it, but yeah, man, something about putting a photo along with words. That's probably the main reason why I got into doing my own illustrations, because, as an illustrator, I was really big on body language for the sake of me not being an artist, you know what I mean? A very detailed artist. So I really paid a lot of attention to body language, and, we all know the saying, pictures say 1,000 words. Well, in this case, they do, but also in conjunction with the words that are written within this story. It complements the story. Yeah, I could go without illustrations and it'll still be a great story. But who doesn't like pictures? You know what I mean? Like, who doesn't like a good picture book along with a strong message, right? But anywho, man, speaking of the message, let's get into the message by reading the synopsis. Alrighty, my good friends, let's get into the story synopsis, i.e. the summary of the story. Here we go. Welcome to the second installment of the SharpenYours Book series. Trouble tends to find 13-year-old Frankie at the park during a basketball game. Things got heated between him and another kid, which resulted in a huge brawl. But with the help from his friends, Frankie not only had reinforcements to back him up, but he also had sources of accountability in them. Tag along with Frankie, Nate, and Cleo on this Thursday evening and share the experience of adventure and growth. Most sincerely, Chris Freeman. Now, real quick, man, if you have the copy that I have, then your copy says Gorth and not growth. All right, man, let me address that real quick, just real fast. As a young author, as a young creative, as a writer, I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? I, I'll put it to you like this, man. Throughout all the books that I've read throughout my lifetime, I've personally been shocked at the amount of grammatical errors or typos that I've noticed while reading a book. And that just let me know, especially as a young creative, a writer, an author himself, we're not perfect. You know, as intelligent as these people are, as creative as these people are, they're still human, man. And I say that to myself because seeing stuff like this is irky, it's agitating, man. It's even embarrassing because you put so much into a project, man. And it's like, really, man, Gorth, or you repeat a word, or, you know, the list goes on, man. I've had to go back a few times and correct a few typos and things of that nature. But stuff like this, you know, I try to take it with a grain of salt. So now that we read the synopsis of the story, what's the main idea? You know, it's a really good question. The main idea of this story, part two, is self-control. And why did I choose that as the main idea? One might ask. Another good question. I chose that as the theme or the main idea because I feel like that's an important topic for the youth to strongly take under consideration, especially as they get older. You know, Frankie, which is the main character within this story, he's I wouldn't call him unstable, but he has a few loose screws in the dome. He's one of those kids within the group who's not opposed to conflict. You know, if he feels disrespected, he'll take it there if he feels like it calls for that, which more times than not, in most cases, it doesn't. But Frankie, he learns a lot within this story about self-control and about where he lacks in certain areas in terms of self-control. You know, since we're talking about Frankie, let's go ahead and break down the rest of the crew. There's three of them, and these are the three of the best friends that you could possibly think of. Like the old term or the old saying, blood couldn't make us any closer. That applies to these three characters right here. So you got Frankie, who we just talked about, and then you got Cleo, who I consider the brains of the group. He's the logical thinker, very intelligent kid, man, wise beyond his years. Then you got young Nate, who I consider to be the mediator of the group. You know, he's a well-rounded kid, especially given the personalities of Frankie, who's more so the muscle of the group or the aggressor. And then you got the logical thinker in Cleo. And then you got young Nate, he's intelligent, but he's not as intelligent as, let's say, a Cleo. You know, he'll squabble, and he exemplified that in part one, but he may not have as many loose screws as, let's say, Frankie. Now let's talk about the dynamics of these three characters, man. There's a lot of individuality within this close-knit group of friends. You know, and that was done intentionally, man. And now, am I saying that it's not okay or that it's not cool to have a lot of things in common as close friends? Absolutely not, man. Absolutely not. I think, having things in common makes the friendship that much better. And that's not to say that these kids don't have anything in common. No, they share common grounds on many different things. And, especially when it comes to, things like loyalty, respect, and real love, just like a brother has for another brother. So yeah, I wanted to exemplify that, or just kind of give that a light of its own, because it's easy to have everything in common, man. But especially for the sake of this story, it only makes the story that much more better, just to have different personalities, strong personalities at that. You have a logical thinker, you got an aggressor, and then you have a mediator. He's the well-rounded kid, and I'm talking about young Nate. It's shown in the story, especially right after the brawl. When the boys, when they hop on their bikes and they fled the scene, they have a moment. They have a brotherly moment where they reanalyze the situation, talk about what happened, why it happened. And between Cleo and Frankie, they were having somewhat of a verbal debate going on, and pertains to what happened and why it happened. And neither one of them were wrong. Neither one of them were wrong. When you hear from Frankie and what he had to say about the situation and why it happened, and it'll make sense why he acted or retaliated the way that he did. Same thing with Cleo. When the reader hears what he has to say, and it'll make sense why he thinks the way that he thinks, and why he sees things from his perspective, and why he's on the way of thinking as you never know, or the what ifs. He takes those kinds of things into consideration. But Frankie, he learns a lot, man. And one of the key lessons that he learns within this story is that regardless of what you do or even say, in most cases, you can't control what other people do or say to you, or even about you. You just can't, man. And that's a harsh truth that, a lot of maybe a lot of young kids out there, or maybe even some adults out there, that don't take that into consideration, or maybe even look at it from that perspective. You know, no matter how good of an influence that I may have on people around me, or what messages I put out to the world, whether it's positive or negative, I have no control over what somebody says about me, or whether it's good or bad. That kind of just stems back to the old saying, control the things that you can control, which is how you react, the things that you do, the things that you say. Control you. You can't control the next person. And that was one of the key lessons that, learn. Frankie had to learn through his friends, through his brothers, his parents. A lot happens in this story, but there's a strong message within this story as well, man. Like I said before, I felt like it was necessary for me to talk about, for me to shine a light on, to kind of just make a meaningful story out of the topic, or the theme, the main idea, rather. But with that being said, man, I want to thank you all for tuning back in for part 2. Stay on the lookout for part 3, which will be over Gather Round Friday, Holiday Behavior, man. This is another good book right here, man. And it's a follow-up to Trouble on Thursday. Those two stories, happen a day apart from one another. So let me break this down for you real quick. Part 1 takes place at the beginning of the summer. 2 months later, it's Trouble on Thursday happens. That's 2 months later. Same summer, 2 months later, right? Then 24 hours later, you got Gather Round Friday. Now, Gather Round Friday is a follow-up on what happened on Thursday. It's a continuation of what happened with Frankie and his situation, and it's also an annual holiday within the community, if that makes sense. It's a yearly celebration, but we'll touch more on that in the next video. Stay tuned for that. Thank you all again for tuning back in. I'll see you all at the next video. Peace, love, and abundance. Thank you.